In the first stage of Arda, before the lands of Beleriand were lost to the sea, the northwestern lands of Dor-lómin were populated by men of the House of Marach, also known as the House of Hador. Allies of the Noldor elves, they were staunch enemies of the Dark Lord Morgoth, who ruled from his fortress of Angband. After the death of his father, the lordship of the territory passed to the mighty warrior Galdor the Tall, who fathered two legendary heroes of men, naming them Húrin and Huor. In their youth, the brothers lived with their kinsmen in the forest of Brethil until joining a war party to battle the orcs encroaching on their lands. While the battle saw their forces victorious, Húrin and Huor were cut off from their allies, pushed back to the river Sirion, and might have been killed if not for the Vala Ulmo, who saw their plight and sent a mist to cover their escape. The eagles then descended and carried them to the safety of Gondolin, the secret city founded by the Noldor elves. King Turgon welcomed them as friends, and after swearing oaths to keep the city's location secret, the eagles returned them to Dor-lómin. Sometime later, their homeland fell under attack by the armies of Morgoth, leading to the death of Lord Galdor as he defended the mountains of Eredwethrin. Húrin, now inheriting the lordship of Dor-lómin, took up the fight and drove them out of the area. As Húrin settled into his role as leader of the territory, his brother Huor was married and fathered a son named Tuor, who later married an elf maiden and fathered a line of half-elven heroes, which included Eärendil the Mariner, Elrond of Rivendell, and Elros of Númenor. Húrin was also wed and started a family, fathering a son Turin and daughter Urwin, later known as Lalaith. However, it was Huor's line that would continue beyond the first age, as the children of Húrin were fated for tragedy. When they were young, a terrible wind, known as the Evil Breath, was sent from Angband, carrying an illness which struck both of Húrin's children. The older boy Turin lay in a fever and dark dream, but eventually recovered and awoke to learn that his beloved sister Urwin did not survive. Turin was deeply affected by her loss, raising a hand towards Morgoth in the north, and crying out, "Marrer of Middle-earth, would that I might see you face to face, and mar you as my lord Fingolfin did." A few years later, the House of Hador was once again called to war, joining the Union of Maedhros, a great alliance of men, elves, and dwarves that rose to battle the armies of the Dark Lord Morgoth to retake the lands lost decades earlier in the Dagor Dagorath. Unfortunately, the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, as it became known, proved to be yet another defeat, as the alliance was betrayed by the Easterlings, also known as the Swarthy Men, following Ulfang the Accursed. During the battle, Húrin once again fought alongside his brother Huor, leading the men of Dor-lómin on behalf of their liege, King Fingon, High King of the Noldor Elves. Yet when the battle turned against them, the army was split and separated, resulting in the death of King Fingon, slain by Gothmog, Lord of the Balrogs. With Fingon dead, Húrin and Huor focused on ensuring the safety of King Turgon of Gondolin, who now inherited the title High King of the Noldor. And so the brothers took what remained of their army and formed a line at the Fen of Serek, sacrificing themselves so the enemy army could not follow the retreating elves and discover the location of their secret city. Although the House of Hador fought valiantly and succeeded in saving the retreating army of the king, they were eventually overwhelmed and slaughtered, with Huor struck by an arrow through the eye. Even after all others were slain, Húrin continued cutting down orcs and trolls until grappled to the ground and taken prisoner by the enemy. Taking their captive to Angband, Húrin was tortured by Morgoth, who sought to learn the location of Gondolin. Yet despite the horrors inflicted upon him, the Lord of Dor-lómin would not break. And so Morgoth cursed the man and his family, seating him immovably on the mountain Thangorodrim, where he must watch from afar, helpless and bitter, as his loved ones suffered their tragic fates. Meanwhile, the Easterlings who betrayed the Union of Maedhros were given the lands of Hithlum, which included Dor-lómin, plundering and enslaving the last remnants of the House of Hador. In order to protect her son Turin, Húrin's wife Morwen sent the boy to Doriath, where he was raised as the adopted son of King Thingol, while she remained in Dor-lómin, giving birth to her third child, Nienor. Fortunately, Húrin's wife and young daughter were spared suffering at the hands of the Easterlings, who largely left them in peace due to a rumor that stated Morwen was a powerful witch, allied with the elves. In Doriath, the boy Turin grew to be a strong and courageous warrior, and at the age of 17 learned that his homeland of Hithlum had completely fallen to the Easterlings, receiving no more messages from his mother. Saddened and angered by the fate of his kinsfolk, Turin asked King Thingol for a place among his warriors so he might battle the armies of the Dark Lord. Granted the position, he was sent to the northern marches of Doriath to defend against orc war parties. Wearing the dragon helm of Dor-lómin passed down through his family, Turin brought such devastation upon his enemies, a rumor began to spread that the famous warrior Húrin Thalion had escaped from Angband. And while many came to love and admire Turin, becoming a friend of Mablung the Heavy Hand and Beleg Strongbow, his rise in the court of Doriath made him an enemy of Seiros, counselor to the king, who spoke and thought ill of Turin and his people. After a confrontation between them led Turin to strike and bloody the elf, Seiros set about ambushing the man when he was alone in the forest. However, Turin proved victorious in their battle, stripping the noble elf naked and chasing him through the woods as punishment for his insults. Unfortunately, Seiros lost his footing while running and fell to his doom. Although Turin did not intend to kill him, he did not mourn the loss and refused to return and face the judgment of the king. Proud and fearless, Turin left Doriath behind and took over leadership of a band of outlaws. Worried about his friend, Beleg Strongbow sought out Turin and his companions, asking that he return to Doriath but was refused. And so the elf returned to King Thingol, asking permission to join Turin's band of warriors. King Thingol allowed it and gifted Beleg the sword Anglakel, forged from the metal of a meteorite by master smith Eol the Dark Elf. Meanwhile, Turin and his companions continued on, encountering a petty dwarf named Mim and forcing him to shelter them in his home of Aman-Rud. Yet one of Turin's men shot an arrow that accidentally killed Mim's son, and so the dwarf held great hatred in his heart for these humans, despite their offer to pay a ransom for the death. Beleg soon joined them in Aman-Rud and fought at their side when Mim betrayed their location to the orcs, who slaughtered nearly all the outlaws and captured Turin. However, Beleg survived the massacre and followed the orcs, encountering an escaped prisoner from Angband along the way named Gwyndor. After helping him recover from his injuries, the two infiltrated an orc camp to find Turin in a state of senseless stupor, having been tortured by the orcs during his captivity. Dragging him to a nearby thicket, Beleg pulled out his sword and started cutting loose his bonds, only to accidentally cut Turin's foot, prompting him to roar awake and take the sword, killing Beleg, who he confused for one of his orc tormentors. When Turin learned what he had done, he nearly went mad from his grief, but Gwyndor stayed by his side and helped him reach the elven city of Nargothrond, where he lived in peace for a time, reforging Anglakel into a new black-bladed sword he named Gurthang. While living in Nargothrond, Turin, son of Húrin, became an important advisor to King Orodreth and practically came to rule in his name, convincing them to abandon their traditions of secrecy and build a great bridge across the river Narog, then gathering and marching their armies to fight openly against the Dark Lord Morgoth at the Battle of Tumhalad. Unfortunately, their forces were unprepared to confront Glaurung, the father of dragons, who devastated their ranks with dragonfire. The battle was an important victory for the forces of Morgoth, who killed King Orodreth and sacked the city, slaughtering and enslaving its population. Glaurung also used his magic to place Turin in a hypnotic state, which caused him to stand by in a stupor as the elves he knew and loved cried out in anguish while carried away in chains. When Turin awoke from his trance, he did not immediately set out to rescue his allies, because the dragon Glaurung had twisted his mind, convincing him that his mother Morwen and younger sister Nienor needed him desperately in Dorlomin. Swiftly he took off after them, unaware that his mother and sister were safe, having left their homeland and traveled to Doriath searching for Turin. Arriving in Dorlomin, the son of Húrin learned that his mother and sister were gone, and was so enraged that he killed the Easterling lord Broda before turning back to seek out and rescue his friend Finduilas, taken during the sack of Nargothrond. Yet because of his journey west, he was too late to save her and collapsed in grief upon her burial mound. Returning to the forest of Brethil, Turin now named himself Turambar, meaning Master of Doom, and came across a beautiful woman crying with great sadness and no memory of her past. She took the name Niniel, and soon they fell in love and were married. And for a short time, Turin knew true happiness. But the curse upon his family had not ended, and soon enough he faced his old foe once more, setting out to confront Glaurung, who was attacking the area. Turin set out with two companions, one of whom lost heart and abandoned them, while the other continued on, fighting and dying in the battle. Yet eventually, Turin succeeded in landing a killing blow, crying out, "Hail, worm of Morgoth! Well met again! Die now, and the darkness have you! Thus is Turin, son of Húrin, avenged." Yet as Glaurung lay mortally wounded, he once again used his powers to enter Turin's mind, causing the man to collapse unconscious by his side. Turin's wife Niniel then found them, and Glaurung used his final moments to inflict more pain and tragedy against the family of Húrin, lifting the veil of amnesia to reveal that her name was actually Nienor, sister of Turin Turambar. Nienor and her mother had spent some time in Doriath, but soon Morwen took off for Nargothrond, in search of her son who was rumored to be in the city. Nienor, unwilling to stay behind, also made the journey, only to find the city already fallen. Glaurung then used his magic to raise a mist from the river, causing Nienor to lose all her memories, eventually losing her way in the forest of Brethil and collapsing in tears, where she was found by her brother Turin, though neither of them recognized the other. When Nienor realized she married her own brother and was pregnant with his child, she threw herself into a ravine, taking her own life. Turin then awoke and was told what had occurred by Brandir the Lame, lord of the Haladin, but was so enraged by his words he would not believe it, killing the man before many witnesses. Yet when his friend Mablung of Doriath arrived and confirmed the truth of Brandir's words, Turin could no longer abide the misery and tragedy of his life, deciding to end it all by falling upon his sword. And so, with Húrin's children all dead, the Dark Lord Morgoth feigned mercy and freed his captive, knowing that the man was now broken and might bring his misery and doom upon others he encountered. Finally free, Húrin first returned home to Dor-lómin, but found it occupied by the Easterlings, with the last of his people enslaved or killed. He then set out to find Gondolin, where he might take refuge with King Turgon, but when he arrived in search of the eagles who might carry him into the city, he received no response, as the king feared this might be a trap by the Dark Lord. Húrin, feeling betrayed by the king for whom he'd sacrificed so much, then yelled out in anger, "Turgon, Turgon, remember the fen of Serek. O Turgon, will you not hear in your hidden halls?" Yet by yelling out in this way, he revealed to Morgoth the general location of Gondolin, which would ultimately contribute to the city's downfall. Turned away, Húrin continued on to the forest of Brethil, where he was at last reunited with his wife, Morwen, encountering her at the graves of their children. Yet the years had been hard on the woman, and he found her in rags, weary from heartache and despair. Saying their final words to each other, Morwen died and was buried alongside her children. The location of their graves was one of the only areas to survive the destruction of Beleriand at the end of the First Age, becoming the island of Tol Morwen. Húrin, now poisoned with bitterness and hatred in his heart, found the petty dwarf Mim and killed him for his betrayal of Turin, then heading to Doriath, where he scornfully blamed King Thingol for failing to protect his son. Yet Melian the Maya saw that Húrin was not in his right mind, and used her magic to lift the cloud of darkness, corrupting his thoughts. His mind now clear, Húrin saw all the harm he'd done, and how his actions only served to help the Dark Lord Morgoth. Distraught and no longer able to cope with the curse that destroyed his family, Húrin Thalien, hero of the House of Hador and rightful lord of Dor-lómin, ended his own life throwing himself into the sea. And while the story of Húrin and his children was one of great tragedy, according to the second prophecy of Mandos, they would one day be avenged in the Dagor Dagorath, the final battle at the end of the world in which the Valar will wage war one last time against the Dark Lord Morgoth. According to the prophecy, in that day, Tulkas shall strive with Morgoth, and on his right hand shall be Eonwe, and on his left Turin Turambar, son of Húrin, coming from the halls of Mandos, and the black sword of Turin shall deal unto Morgoth his death and final end, and so shall the children of Húrin and all fallen men be avenged. Love fantasy and sci-fi? Click on the link in the description box to check out tblocks.com, where you can sign up for a monthly subscription service, which brings you an authentic, officially licensed shirt every month from some of their great partners like Marvel, Star Wars, DC Comics, and more. If interested, be sure to use the promo code CivilizationTBX for 10% off your order. A special thanks to all those who contribute to CivilizationEx, like Knight of the X, Michael Edwards, Master of Dagger and Coin, Knight of the X, Jordan Stark, Fen the Sundowner, and Kagor the Reborn Snow. If you would like to help CivilizationEx, click on the Patreon link, and please be sure to like and subscribe, and click on the links to see more.